Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, it's Jeff, and welcome to the Trailing Losers of Defeat. Ready? That's right, it's the TLDR podcast, and joining me today is Daniel. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. How are you today?
I am doing phenomenal!
Would you care to quantify that?
It's like cranking it to 11!
Aha! You did bring 11 into this.
But our viewers don't know the association.
in the kind of pre-show, we were talking about. I don't even remember why we brought those numbers up.
Bad things. I don't know.
Oh yeah, bad things. And then I was like, today's Truth Corner brought to you by the letter G and the number 11. And then yeah.
I was able to correlate the G, but 11 had no purpose.
No purpose at all. Until now. So thanks for bringing that back up.
Full circle.
So, what did you get up to this week, Jeff?
I was planning so strongly on playing Chrono Trigger and World of Warcraft at the same time and just having a good time of it, rocking back and forth every day, giving Chrono Trigger a couple hours, giving World of Warcraft a couple hours. But what happened was that phone issue that I had last week where it smashed. I had one of those things that you could put on the back of your phone that like expands out like a handle.
Oh, a pop socket.
Yeah, so I had one of those on my phone. But then with this new phone, I was like, well, I got to protect the new phone, so I got an OtterBox with it. But those pop sockets don't attach to an OtterBox. The texture, it doesn't work. So I can't prop up my phone when I'm in bed anymore to watch. Because what I usually do when I play Chrono Trigger, I go to bed, I play Chrono Trigger for like an hour, and I'll play somebody else's Let's Play of Chrono Trigger on my phone. I like playing alongside Let's Players, especially people that I enjoy watching in general. So that's what I do usually. But without that pop socket to keep it like propped up a little bit, I couldn't get it up or anything like that. And so that not sexual at all. And so I
I was wondering if you knew what you were saying.
Yeah, I couldn't. It just didn't work out. So I was like, well, never mind. I won't worry about it. So instead of doing split time between Chrono Trigger and World of Warcraft, I ended up just going full blast on World of Warcraft. Like I did not give myself any time for any other games.
No.
I played. I think I have the mage is eternally shelved at this point. I'll return to her when I have money, basically. But now I have like a 23 paladin, a 23 druid, a 23 hunter, and then like a 12 warlock and a 9 rogue. Oh no, 8 rogue. That's our team set there. And then I have.
Yeah.
I just started a brand new priest and warrior that are just sitting at level 1.
So your total playtime on WoW Classic so far is probably somewhere around 120 hours?
No.
No?
I would say it's closer to like 500 hours.
Oh, are you serious? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I had no idea. I'm hovering somewhere around the 70-hour mark. And I've managed to bring one character up to 20, and my second character is at 19, so she's getting real close. I'm benching her, though, because she's out of rested XP. So I'm going to put her aside for a little while and then move on to, I think I have a 13 and then a level 7 hunter, question mark?
I see.
But yeah, I played quite a bit of WoW Classic this week as well. Not as much as I would like to because life got in the way, and I ended up having to spend several late evenings out doing things. And what I usually do is I get up at 5:30 a.m. to play my games because that's the only time that the whole family is asleep and I can be left in relative peace. So I get up early and I play for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if I'm lucky before the kids wake up. But because I was otherwise engaged in a lot of evening events, I ended up taking that time to sleep in and do the get better myself thing.
Right. I spent this weekend actually not playing games as much as I wanted to. I decided to watch the Hobbit trilogy. And the reason I decided that is because me and a bunch of our mutual friends got together like Jeffrey, Justin, Kylie, we all went to Edmonton and watched like on the giant screen in IMAX theaters the first Hobbit movie, and it was tremendous. It was awesome. But for some reason, when the second movie came out, I was like, I'll wait for it to come out on DVD or whatever. And then when that one came out, I watched it when it came out. But when the third movie came out, I didn't even give it a second thought. And so it's been out for years, and I've never watched it. So I decided to try to get through the trilogy on the weekend to watch all that through. The first movie was much as I remembered it. I've only watched it once before, so I was like, okay, yeah, this is neat. Second movie, I liked the side plot of Gandalf going into Mirkwood and confronting the necromancer and all that. And then the third movie, I'm only about halfway through it right now, because that's just like the Lord of the Rings. It's just a long trilogy to get through.
Well, my opinion of that particular series. So I have 1 and 2 downstairs, and 2 still has its plastic on it.
Oh,
So, yeah. So I watched number 1, and I was really, really unimpressed with acting quality. I was unimpressed with set design. Honestly, I was. I don't like being able to look at a movie and being able to tell when they're using a screen. You know, I want a real set. I want to see, you know, whatever 400 acting, whatever the extras are. Like I want 400, 500 people out there all acting as extras, whatever. I don't care, but I don't like. I just don't like when it really takes me out of it, is what I'm trying to say. So I saw that in number 1, and that really turned me off to the entire series. And then my mother-in-law bought me. Oh, and I was vehemently opposed to them as well, because I had heard at one point that Mr. Jackson, the
Peter Jackson,
Peter Jackson, the
director.
Director, that's the word I'm looking for. He did not want to do that series, but had to as part of his contract for the original 3, I guess.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
I don't know either. This was like the teenage me that heard this, and so it kind of put a bad flavor in my mouth right away. I was like, yeah, it's pretty obvious he didn't want to do this, because look at all these things that I can pick out of it. And so I let that color my judgment, and I never did pick them up ever again.
You are right to an extent,
the
though.
first one.
To an extent, you are most definitely right, because there's a lot more CGI being used, less practical effects. They didn't do that tricksy camera thing that they did with the Hobbits and Lord of the Rings. They just, I don't know how they did it, but it wasn't a realistic depiction of dwarves in height comparisons to Gandalf and stuff like that. So the dwarves running around, like Thorin, the main dwarf, he's like, he just looks like a small human. He looks like a bearded hobbit, and it doesn't look good. There are other dwarves in the party that look like dwarves, but then there's other dwarves in the party that just look like little humans, and you're like, I don't know what they're going for with this. Because I really like the design of Gimli. I think Gimli is awesome.
I agree. Yeah,
but
all these other
dwarves, not all of them, I should say, a lot of the other dwarves are just small humans, and I'm like, I don't. It's like an immersion breaker for me. There are also other things that are like, just like, you're like, Peter Jackson made Lord of the Rings, and then he made this. You're like, what the heck happened? Like,
exactly.
There's a scene where Galadriel is helping Gandalf because, like, have you even seen the second movie?
I don't think so.
Okay, so in the second movie, this is all based on things that happen in side stories. But Gandalf, every time Gandalf disappears from the main party, he actually pursues a side story. So, in the books he just disappears, but in the expanded universe he actually goes elsewhere. And so in the movies, he goes to Mirkwood, meets Radagast the Purple, or the Brown, or whatever Radagast is.
The red. Radagast the Red.
Are you sure?
I'm quite sure.
Oh no, now I have to look it up. Radagast the Brown. It's
The
brown.
brown.
Yeah.
Brown is really just like a dried blood kind of red.
Okay. So anyway, so there's a scene where he goes to meet Radagast. They learn about the corruption in Mirkwood, like the magical corruption, and then they employ the help of Galadriel and Saruman and Hugo Weaving's character, Elrond. So
Oh,
all these super powerful entities in the Lord of the Rings like mythos gather together to confront this necromancer. And there's a scene where Gandalf is fighting, or he's not even fighting. He went to like intentionally spring the trap, and then he got trapped, and then the rest of them had to go save him. And Galadriel arrived at the scene first, and I don't even know the gist. Galadriel is the stupidest character in the entire series, in my opinion. I really don't like her because she's like unnaturally powerful. So she arrives, beats off the bad guys around Gandalf, and then picks him up. And I'm like, okay, obviously she's strong enough to be able to pick him up. I'm okay with that logic.
it's elves, right?
Yeah, I can wrap my head around that. But then it zooms out and shows her carrying Gandalf down some stairs, and he's literally just like a stiff board. And you're like, that's so clearly a fake. Like, why can't you give it like a rag doll at least or something to her? Like his legs don't move; they just stick out at a weird angle, and you're like, oh, that looks so bad. Anyway.
Yeah, it seemed like they maybe had a small budget for those movies because the set wasn't great, the props weren't great. Of course, I'm still speaking to episode 1. I don't know about the other two, but I don't think the budget was quite the same as what it was for the Lord of the Rings series.
Well, another thing, and I know we should be focused on games. I just want to bring up one more thing. The real weakness of Tolkien is he's not, and it's the same with George Martin actually. He's not good at writing combat. So anytime there's a huge battle scene, it just gets like rushed. Like the Battle of Helm's Deep, for example, is like a couple pages. It's like nothing's happening. Even though in the movie it's a huge, epic event. It's the same in the Hobbit. When the huge epic fight starts to happen, the dragon swoops down to attack that lake city, and then it dies, and you're like, oh, and you almost miss where the dragon dies, and you're like, what? Okay, and then the actual battle happens, but Bilbo is somewhere else, and so he doesn't view the battle, and therefore that battle finishes, and you're like, okay. So then when you're watching the third movie, which is the Battle of Five Armies, or no, I think the dragon dies in the second movie. No, he dies at the beginning of the third movie. Anyway, he gets killed in the third movie, and you're like, oh, that's, everyone comes to see The Hobbit expecting to see the dragon as the main villain, and then he dies at the very beginning of the third movie. Yeah. And then it's this huge battle between all these armies, and you're like, "Oh man, this is actually a pretty epic fight." But nonetheless, it's it wasn't drawn that way for me in my head as a 12-year-old kid reading the book, or 8-year-old, or however old I was when I read The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
yeah,
it's good, but it's not up to snuff as what I would expect from Peter Jackson.
Yeah. Agreed. So going back to what we managed to do this week, I'll just bang this last one out real quick here so we can get to our news segment. But I have more to report on the Elder Scrolls Blades game. So again, the game is still in early access, and it is impressing me everywhere I turn with everything that they've managed to squeeze in there so far. The game is beautifully made, like I said before. And I did have a gripe. I think last time I talked about the woodenness of the controls.
Yep.
And I'm actually becoming quite a bit more used to them. And your characters' animations they're still a little wooden. like as far as like swinging the weapons and stuff like that, blocking and whatever else. But it's consistent with Elder Scrolls games. It looks the same as, say, in Skyrim.
Right.
So while it's a style that I've kind of critiqued a little in the past, again, it is consistent with the Elder Scrolls games. So I suppose it might be a stylistic choice at this point, and not necessarily a thing to criticize. So in early access, where it is right now, it appears to be primarily focused just on rebuilding this town. Now, as I play, I get a little bit more of the lore kind of trickle fed to me on what's happened. So the town has been destroyed by an opposing military force. I'm not going to get too far into it, just in case any of our listeners want to give the game a try. But there was an opposing military force came by, destroyed the town, razed it to the ground. And I assume there's going to be more lore to follow. But your primary focus so far, I've put about 10 hours in the game at this point. And so far, the focus has been to rebuild the town. Everything from the smithy to, just like even down to individual houses. You've got like maybe 40 plots, and you're just building buildings wherever you want. But of course, you're slowed down by the materials that you've gathered, and you have to go out on quests because you have to earn money and you have to upgrade your gear. And it's the normal Elder Scrolls kind of experience. But one big thing that it's lacking is the open world map like you get in say Skyrim, or really any of the other Elder Scrolls games I've played up to this point, where you've got like the provincial map where you can pretty much run any direction you want. This is quite a bit more linear. So you spend maybe 10-20% of your time right in the town. But then you pick up a whole myriad of quests, and you just go into your menu and select the quest you want to start, and then it ports you to where that quest takes place. So there's no travel. There's no provincial space for which you can kind of just move around and explore. It's not an open world kind of experience, at least not yet. I'm not sure that it ever will be, because I think that they do have to keep it somewhat small in consideration for, the file sizes and your mobile devices. But I think that it's quite all right as a mobile experience. So yeah, that's my report on Elder Scrolls Blades. I'm enjoying it, and I think that I'm going to keep playing it.
Does it make you want to play any of the previous ones again, or anew?
It doesn't make me want to pick up, say, like, so Skyrim was my favorite one, is probably still my favorite one. It doesn't make me want to go and like pick it up again and play Skyrim, but it does give me that fun kind of nostalgia for, like, when I was in my early 20s and just playing endless hours of Skyrim.
Because I will say, when I played the Fallout Shelter game for the phone, even though it mechanically has nothing to do with the actual Fallout games, it really made, because of its world and its climate, its atmosphere, all that, it really wanted me to pick up a Fallout game.
Oh yeah? Huh, that's interesting. Having never played the Fallout games apart from Fallout Shelter, I can't speak to that, but I did quite enjoy the game, like the Fallout Shelter game. But again, very simple, because they have to take into consideration what device you're going to be playing it on. Probably only, at the time that I was playing it, I only had a 16 gigabyte phone, so I have to keep their apps fairly small.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we get into our main topic today, which, of course, is all about the console wars, there are a few news segments that I wanted to cover. They're not, they're not breaking news, but they're still, like, they caught my eye. Two of these little stories are based on Sony, and one's based on Blizzard. So I'll do the Blizzard one last, just because it's basically our favorite company. So the first thing is PS4, the PlayStation Network, all that has removed all of Facebook integration, including avatars and the ability to share videos. And while a Facebook representative claimed that the service is only unavailable while they form their new contract agreement. It's suspected that this came in the wake of another data leak scandal at Facebook. It happens often enough. I mean, maybe Sony decided to save themselves any further trouble, though the loss may ultimately be pretty good, like pretty huge, considering the global nature of Facebook.
Is that the Zynga leak?
No, they referenced the link, but I don't have it open at the moment. It was something that I had no knowledge of. I don't even use Facebook though, so that's probably
Yeah.
why.
I don't I don't play any Facebook games either, but I seem to remember that the game developers Zynga used to have games on the Facebook platform. And I did get from my who is my antivirus? I don't remember. Whichever my antivirus is on my PC, I got an email from them saying, maybe redo all of your username and password stuff to secure your account because Zynga had confirmed a massive data breach.
Yeah, especially it is definitely a high risk with these mass social platforms. But at the same time, like just canceling Facebook is like that's a pretty huge step, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of deliberation behind that, and I wonder if they. I mean, obviously they thought about the pros and the cons, but it's still a pretty hefty move.
Yeah, there might be more things happening in the background too. Like while they're trying to secure a new contract, it could be one trying to strong arm the other into accepting terms that are less than favorable as well. It might be that kind of strategic move.
Right. In other news, Sony also stated that they would be making their new console more green and save on power. The initial assessment is that for every 1 million users who use their console, the PS5, would save enough power to power 1,000 homes. The company
Wow.
also promised that changes to their current console has already ultimately saved about 16 million metric tons of carbon emissions, projecting that the total will increase to around 29 million in the next 10 years. For context, that equates to the entire nation of Denmark.
That is impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not necessarily stressed out about climate change, but these are changes that can also help your pockets. I mean, electricity, for me at least, is that quiet but deadly bill that just sneaks up on me sometimes. Especially when you, like, carelessly leave a light on overnight or something.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough that I never see my electric bill. It comes in the mail. My wife pays it. I never have to see it.
Oh, good. I'm on this weird plan with my gas and water and stuff that it doesn't charge me for my personal usage. It charges me based on the aggregate of everyone's usage, and basically it means there's less spikes for me.
Right.
The bill tends to be about the same, but the electrical bill is crazy. So, so let's go over to Blizzard. These are, like I said, these are little tiny stories, but they're really interesting as well. Blizzard announced with the upcoming patch for World of Warcraft that World of Warcraft would be getting a complete and total overhaul to its auction house.
Okay, I'm interested.
So, the greatest, let me start off, the greatest of its many changes is the ability to buy items in any quantity with a single click.
Yes.
So now, instead of having like just a sea of single stacks and then a clump of max stack items, you can just say, hey, I want this item, the item will show up, and then you can say, I want to buy this much of that item, and then it'll list the appropriate pricing for like expensive to like if you buy this many it'll cost you this much, but if you buy this many it'll cost you this much, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that way, even for posting things on the auction house, it'll be you just place an item on and it'll ask you how many of that item you want to put up. That doesn't matter stacks, counts, or anything like that. You just say, I want to put up 700 of this item, and it'll just do it all.
Hey, that's incredible. I with my warrior that's level 19 and just got benched. She is a gatherer. That's the only professions she has. She has herbalism and mining, because I was trying to, make cash in preparation for that, that looming mount at level 40. Um, and so I just finished using the clunky, old, super annoying auction house, which is not very much different from the auction house today
It is not.
live. It's a little different, but it's not like there's a little bit better functionality today, but not a whole heck of a lot. So what we have right now is a system that's barely been updated in the last 15, 16 years. Um, and I found it was really annoying to try and post because I don't have Auctionator or Auctioneer or any kind of add-on for using the auction house. So to make single stacks where I'll probably make the most money, it was not worth the time to me to sit there and put 63 linen cloth and 112 iron ore or copper ore on the auction house. It would have taken me 2 hours to do all of that.
Yeah, it definitely takes either dedication or some sort of add-on to do it for you.
So yeah, no, that'd be fantastic. They're probably not going to bring it to classic, which makes me a little envious, but
Yeah. But in other new, additionally, because World of Warcraft Classic is still doing so tremendously, um, instead of pushing Dire Maul with the honor system and a few other features, they decided to instead release Dire Maul early. So that'll be coming out on the 15th of October, which will be around the time that this episode goes live. So perfect timing. And so I believe Dire Maul is like between level 45 and 60, and it has like 3 wings, if I remember right. Maybe just 2. It's been a long time since I've done any kind of Dire Maul. But the Dire Maul is really interesting because you can do tribute runs and stuff like that are like timed or have certain stipulations that allow you to like unlock more and more items. And I mean, right now there's so many people who have Sulfuris already that you're like, how? like people are really just going ham on Classic and not getting bored of it either.
they're just eating it all up. Yeah, that's great. I wonder what their plans are. Like I would love to sit in the boardroom when all the WoW Classic devs are sitting there going, well, they are going to want more content soon. What are we going to do?
Right. Yeah, no, it's I actually was completely unaware of the phasing system that they were implementing. So I was expecting the entire game when Classic first released. I wasn't really disappointed because I really wasn't racing to do anything ultimately. But yeah, I was just like, because they're phasing it, it makes me think that maybe they're going to phase expansions in, because it's just weird because the whole shtick of this phase thing is like phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is, oh, we don't want to release Next Ramus yet because otherwise people will run that instead of doing whatever Molten Core, because it has
Right.
better gear. But at the same time, if you tried to do Nax Ramus without Molten Core gear, you'd die. Nax Ramus is a huge step up. Same with Encourage. The both like mighty difficult dungeons or raids that require you to have like gear from the previous raids.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously the first kill of Ragnaros, everybody was in like green gear and stuff, but Ragnaros ultimately is not a difficult fight. It's not complex. It's just don't step in the fire kind of fight.
Yeah, not when you compare it to like today's bosses, because they've had to come up with hundreds of unique boss fights and brand new mechanics and stuff like that. So they've and understandably, like, the player base has gotten older and more mature, and our ability to execute on game mechanics has improved dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
So what was difficult in 2004 is quite elementary today. So yeah, Ragnaros is not a difficult fight.
Yeah,
But at the
absolutely.
time, it certainly was. Everybody was like, "Oh, more fire resist gear," which is still a thing, but it's like, well, you're just not getting hit with that as much.
Well, more than that too is Ragnaros was the first raid boss, or like he was the final boss, but like
Right.
Molten Core was the first raid of World of Warcraft. Nobody
Yeah.
had I mean, you had EverQuest and stuff like that before World of Warcraft, but it's still like a premise that's largely unfamiliar to people. Um, and obviously now that's not at all the case. Yeah. So anyway, I think we should get into this main topic because I got a lot of stuff to say.
Okay.
I'm doing
Well,
the I'm doing the full history of this wretched war.
whew.
I've broken it down into multiple wars to make it seem more thematic. But yeah, it's basically going to be separated by generation, and we'll just go from there.
All right. Well, you go get started, and I'll go and prepare Thanksgiving dinner while I wait.
What?
I'm talking about how long it's going to take you to get through, and don't worry about it. Just go. That joke fell flat. That goose was cooked.
Whatever.
All right, go.
So the earliest console war began in 1980 and ended in 1984 between a number of what would be now called obscure consoles. Of course, there was the Atari, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, SG-1000, but then there were other things like the Magnafox Odyssey, the Cassette Vision, things that I've never heard of. I've only heard of the Atari, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, and the SG-1000. The SG-1000 is a Sega console, and it's mostly because the initial console wars were Pyrrhic in nature. The so-called winner of this first war lost basically just as much as its competitors did, which allowed Japan to swoop in and establish its complete dominance in the wake of the battle. In fact, Japan took such strong root in the industry that it actively discouraged American and European game companies from getting involved. So why did this war end in desolation? Like other aspects of the market can, there was a video game crash in 1983. Pair that with an overabundance of competition, and you've got yourself a big pain in the neck. Each console released its own flood of games trying to outdo one another, and ironically skipped out on that old thing we call quality control. Not to mention this era being the first in the release of home computers, which were relatively low cost at the time. Now, cost is another big factor when thinking about these things. The Atari 2600, for example, released in 1977, sold at an initial price of about $185. That amounts to about $700 in today's market. The SG-1000, released only in Japan, sold for a cool 15,000 yen, or roughly $230 in today's standards, but again, only in Japan. So the consoles readily available in America, at the very least, were very, very costly. No one wanted to buy more than one of these, so only the Atari 2600 did really well because it hit the shelves first. The 1983 crash wasn't the first. The first crash for gaming was in 1977. Still in their infancies, the first game console companies had a stutter step when they realized they needed to sell their older, obsolete systems that were flooding the market. Manufacturers were forced to sell their consoles at a complete loss to clear stock, creating a glut in the market. Much like the later crash, there was a massive ambiguity in regards to quality with these consoles. In fact, the game that saved consoles from a total failure was Space Invaders for the arcades. Ironically, the golden age of arcade video games began in 1978, very shortly before the second fall of consoles. While games like Space Invaders were just raking in the quarters at the arcades, Atari was spinning its gears as quickly as it could to eventually churn out the 2600 in 1980. Hot on the heels of the arcade cabinet's massive successes, a slew of other console companies just threw their consoles at the behemoth that was Atari, and thus we had the first war. Now this is where it gets intense. Before I move on though, I think it's really interesting that the And important, actually, to note that the first console war was started by majority American companies, with its losers completely withdrawing and quitting the business. Every subsequent battle has been waged nearly solely by Japanese companies.
That is interesting to note. And we saw, as you just mentioned, we saw that Japan kind of swooped in and took over the American market and just like pretty effectively ousted the Americans from creating consoles for a very long time.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if you knew this, Daniel, but Atari is an American company.
I didn't know that, but
Atari sort of sounds Asian, so I assumed it was Japanese.
It doesn't sound Asian to me.
Oh, usually when a word or a name ends in a vowel, that's sort of like that. That's very Japanese in its naming scheme.
Okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
so because of the mega crash of 1983, all American companies basically lost any accountability, allowing Japan to steamroll its way into a vast market of curious though cautious customers. Up to this point, Atari, the giant at the time, had survived 2 separate crashes. Now, however, Atari was like a maimed animal. It would survive a little longer until the ancient lion that was Nintendo and the sneaky shark that was Sega tore their way onto the stage. Now, I'm going to skip any home computer competitions because the console wars, at least in my own definition, exclude the computer from this race. After the crash of '83, we found ourselves in the 8-bit era of Atari, Nintendo, and Sega. The first console that would grace America in this period would be Nintendo's Family Computer. Daniel, have you heard of the Family Computer?
I have heard of it, but pretty obscure.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure I knew that Nintendo made a family computer.
Let me clarify. Let's see if this
Okay.
makes any more sense to you. The Family Computer is often shortened to Famicom. Is that familiar to you?
Okay, I think so.
The
Pretty
Famicom
sure.
was the Japanese name for the NES.
No way.
It's slightly altered. If you look up images, it looks slightly different from the NES, but it's still effectively the same thing. So Atari was injured, and Sega wasn't doing so swell after that crash, and now they have this new competitor in the form of Nintendo that just pushed a decent console with a variety of really high fidelity games. Thus began the First World War of gaming consoles.
Dun dun dun.
The previous war was an American battle. You know, it's like a civil war. It's all too close to reality, isn't it? History does repeat. Anyway, in this new gaming climate, Nintendo and Sega began their war by competing for control over certain regions of the world. So, though Sega put up an initially strong strategy, its release of the more advanced Master System came too late in 1985. The NES already had the market controlled for 2 years in Japan and had started on the American audiences. Now, this wasn't a straight loss because of arriving too late to the party. Nintendo had kept a vice grip on its developers, restricting them from releasing their games on other consoles if they already existed for the NES. As a result, few performing third-party developers were available to design games for Sega. The Atari released its 7800 and did relatively well for itself, but both Atari and Sega at this time were so far behind Nintendo, they were coughing on its lingering dust trail. Now, usually when a new console is released, the previous stops being sold a year or two later. This wasn't the case with Nintendo. Unlike Sega, who just moved on to their next console when the time came, Nintendo continued to repair the NES systems until, get this, October 31st of 2007.
Wow.
Yeah, I had no idea until I read this article. It was insane. It wasn't until after I graduated. That was what? The era of the Wii? Like, that's crazy. This basically means that the original NES consoles remained in, however small quantity, on the market well after the end of its official lifespan. As a result, any sales figures you ever look up in regards to Nintendo versus Sega during the mid-'80s is absurdly skewed by Nintendo's crazy diligence. Now, while Atari remained mostly localized to the US and Canada, Nintendo and Sega fought far more fiercely on more exotic lands. You'd think that Nintendo's total dominance in America and Japan would continue to other parts of the world, but Sega somehow clinched its own share of the spoils. The Sega Master System totally dominated South America, Europe, and even Australia, allowing the now experienced company to maintain its position on Nintendo's tail. So did we have a winner here? Yes, kind of. Nintendo was the leader of the pack, but Sega experienced overwhelming success in territories that Nintendo had totally failed. We clearly had Atari as the loser, but in terms of the area conquered, it would be a tough call between Sega and Nintendo. Let's move on to the 16-bit era, where we can look at more familiar systems. This was the era of the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. A console known as the NEC TurboGrafx 16 popped its head into sparse markets in Japan, but this was now truly down to the two behemoths. But what happened to Atari? Well, while it sold at 7,800, about 4 million copies, it couldn't hold a candle to Sega's 13 million and wasn't even a blip to Nintendo's 62 million. The maimed Atari ended up curling up under a tree and fading away, while the Sega shark swam hungrily after the golden-haired Nintendo lion. So after hearing those sales figures, you might think that Nintendo was just totally unbeatable at this point, and wouldn't see competition until maybe the PlayStation and Xbox hit the markets, right? Well, it was at this point that I would say that the console wars reached their golden age. I guess I would say this was like the healthiest competition that had ever happened up until this point. It was just between two major companies. Another company called the NEC, or Nippon Electric Company, known as the head of the Japanese PC market at the time, tried sticking its nose in, but just did not meet any success at all, and any it did have was restricted to the Eastern markets. For those interested, Nippon Electric Company, Nippon is actually what Japanese people call Japan. Like, Japan is an English name for Japan. Its actual name to its natives is Nippon.
Okay, I was unaware.
How dare you?
Culturally unsensitive.
Exactly,
Insensitive. Yes. I can't even speak English.
Did you say asensitive?
I said unsensitive.
Oh, okay. Well, you should have said asensitive.
Asensitive.
Whatever. Is better. The true battle took place between Nintendo and Sega, and their chosen battleground now was America. The Genesis came out about 2.5 years earlier than the Super Nintendo, but it did not perform well until Sonic arrived, at which point sales began to boom. Only with the help of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega managed to at last pull into the lead. It was at this point that Sony collected a focus group that found that teenage boys were less likely to admit to owning an SNES over a Genesis, suggesting that the Genesis was more popular amongst an older audience. And wouldn't you know it, 3 holiday seasons passed and Nintendo had fallen further behind Sega in sales, all 3 times. But this time, it was Donkey Kong's turn to give Nintendo aid, becoming the biggest game release of the year, a commendable accomplishment given that Donkey Kong Country released in November of '94. However,
oh, wow.
Nintendo still found themselves behind Sega. Though both companies had a very healthy grip on the market, the 16-bit generation was coming to a close, and Sega was not prepared to release their next console. In an effort to bludgeon Lion Nintendo over the head with overwhelming sales figures, Shark Sega licensed the Genesis to Majesco so it could re-release the console. I need to take an aside. Can you imagine a shark wielding a bludgeon to assault a lion?
I'm just wondering where these metaphors come from.
I don't.
Why is Sega a shark and why is Nintendo a lion? Lions aren't even native to Japan.
They're perfect villains of each other, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If we see a Sharknado and a Lion-nado in the next war, I will be impressed.
So Majesco, for those who don't know, and it's not at all a mystery that you wouldn't know, Majesco was a company that was founded in 1986 that made its name by reissuing old titles that had been abandoned by their original publishers at cheaper prices. So the Genesis Model 3 released at a $50 price tag, but Nintendo matched its price trying to keep up. So they dropped the cost further to $40 and soon to $30, but Nintendo matched them at every single step. Despite the effort to stifle Sega's aggression, though, Nintendo finished the year yet again behind Sega. In 1991 and 1992, Sega announced and released the Mega CD add-on for their Genesis. That contained a faster CPU, it had more memory, it allowed for enhanced graphics, but its main focus was to allow for greater game size. Keep in mind that cartridges of the day could typically hold between 8 to 16 megabits or 1 to 2 megabytes, while the advent of the CD-ROM allowed for up to 5,000 megabits or 640 megabytes.
Huh.
So, I know we're talking about wars, but this might link into a future episode, so I thought I'd mention it. The Mega CD add-on for the Genesis didn't do all that well, but it did release two major titles that most gamers have heard of. First, of course, was Sonic CD, which was a phenomenal success. Second game was Night Trap. Have you ever heard of Night Trap?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, well, maybe that's for the best. Night Trap is a very stupid game. What a start, huh? It was basically, you're like a soldier or something, like a spy soldier, and you have eyes on an entire household of obviously just attractive girls. I think you're meant to like protect them from aliens or enemy soldiers, but it's live action. So it's like, it's a horrible resolution video of girls essentially on candid camera. It's stupid. You have to like press buttons to trap the aliens that are breaking into the house without the residents of the house finding out that there's aliens breaking in everywhere. There's all these hidden doors and trap doors, and it's stupid. And it's actually one of the driving reasons why the ESRB rating system exists.
You know what? I'm gonna look this up because I feel, as you describe it, I feel like I've seen, like it's like a cutaway. Let me see, Night Trap.
It's so stupid.
It's like the house is like a cutaway of the house. Is that what's happening?
Well, it's like a Full House kind of. It looks like a stage.
Okay, no, this is nothing like I was thinking. I was thinking like a 16-bit house that's been bisected so you can see each of the rooms. No, I see. This is like, yeah, okay, live action. I should have caught that when you said it was live action. It looks like it's very adult themed though.
Yeah, and the reason the ESRB system exists because of it is because this game developer somewhere played the game, called it disgusting because in one of the scenes there's a girl in like a nightgown in the bathroom, and all she's doing is there's no nudity at all. It's a very, very tame scene. She's in the bathroom, she's doing her hair, and then three aliens walk into the bathroom. And of course, your job as the player is to trap them. But if you choose not to do anything, they put this weird like collar thing around her and like extract blood from her neck, and then run away. That's all the scene is. It's kind of the plot is irrelevant to the scene, but it's a stupid little like maybe 30-second scene. And apparently this guy who played the game and got to that point thought it was so disgusting that there needed to be ratings on games like there are ratings on movies.
The times were different back then. Holy.
Or maybe he was just really uptight. I don't know. Where was I? Right. So the Mega CD was, in my opinion, Sega's poor attempt to hold on to old technology. The worldwide sales figures appeared to place Nintendo ahead. Nintendo sold 49 million units over Sega's 43 million, but due to the battle of decreasing costs and the like, though selling fewer units, Sega still had the upper hand. Now, before we enter the next war, we actually had our first handheld war at this time, pitting the Game Gear against the Game Boy. I only mention these because, again, it is Sega versus Nintendo. Not much can really be said. The Game Boy didn't just come out on top, but it far outlasted the Game Gear. The Atari had a handheld console called the Lynx, which I've only really seen in pictures. If I had to be objective, I'd say the Game Gear was vastly superior of the competition. It had a light-up screen, superior graphics, although it did feast ravenously on batteries. In the end, the Game Gear sold about 11 million copies, and the Game Boy sold about 120 million copies. So, who won here? Nintendo moved more units in both console and handheld battlefields. Sega, however, made greater profits. It's here that we would start to see the turning point when Sega began to lose all semblance of advantage. And this is the dawn of the Second World War of gaming. Wait, I think this is the Third World War of gaming. But I forgot to announce the 16-bit era dramatically. So moving on.
Didn't I do the big piano dun dun dun? Didn't I do that?
Sure.
There was dramaticism anyways. Moving on.
The dawn of the 32/64-bit era came with a new contender. The Sony PlayStation arrived as one of the first consoles to use the CD-ROM for its games, and a vastly greater piece of storage versus cartridges at the time. Of course, nowadays, with the coming of solid-state hard drives and USB sticks, a rework of your standard cartridge would end up fitting far more room in the long run. But hindsight's 2020, and we didn't have the technology back then anyway. So the reason this war is around both 32-bit and 64-bit is because the PlayStation arrived with staggering success and fought a war on two fronts. It fought the 32-bit war with the Sega Saturn and the 32-bit versus 64-bit war against the, obviously, Nintendo 64. The Saturn released first, much like its predecessor had, and much like the first time, Sega hit a wall when it came to sales. Though performing well in Japan, it lacked the third-party support to expand beyond Japan. Sega also chose to use dual processors for the Saturn for questionable reasons. Some think it was the rational next step in technology, while others believe it was an overreaction to hearing what the PlayStation specifications were. The Saturn was also quite difficult to program for, and it's thought that only Sega's first-party developers were able to fully utilize its second CPU. Such difficulties led to the Saturn's games lacking polish and luster that were clearly obvious on both the PlayStation and N64. In addition to its programming difficulties, Sega launched the Saturn in America 4 months early to get a head start, but Sega's never been able to grasp the concept of the early bird, and thus launched their console with very few games immediately available for it. This in addition to its being $100 more expensive than the PS1, and only being available at a few retail stores, Sega started the war with both feet firmly planted in the mud, essentially. Sony was the promising up-and-comer, utilizing expensive ad campaigns before releasing its console and choosing to appeal to an audience that wasn't already fanatical about Nintendo or Sega. Remember, Sony was the ones who used a control group to find out teenagers didn't like being associated with Nintendo. So instead of appealing to a family audience, Sony aimed for teenagers and adults with its titles. Its ad campaigns involved pushing the PlayStation as a necessity beside the TV and VCR, as if every household would need one. This was a definitive advantage for Sony, since Nintendo's Mario and Sega's Sonic were both being pushed into cartoons for kids to watch. So instead of trying to compete directly, Sony aimed for a completely different audience. At the end of the first foray into the console market, Sony had sold over 100 million units, crushing everyone else combined. Nintendo finished with 33 million sales, and Sega with, regrettably, 9 million. So the new competitor came in strong and flattened everyone in its charge. The Sega Shark was left stranded on land, and the Nintendo line was now looking over its shoulder. Though Sony came in strong, Nintendo had such a great running up to this generation that the victory wasn't felt for Sony. Rather, it wasn't a loss for Nintendo either. It was a pretty neutral finish. And thus,
Before you move on, I need to know what the PlayStation Predator is going to be.
I'll come up with it in time.
Okay.
And thus we enter into the first of the modern console wars, otherwise known as the terrific trifecta. Okay, I made that up. The-
I hadn't noticed.
yeah. This was a war with an American company at long last. Sega wasn't doing well, realizing its gills weren't meant for air and it wasn't evolving lungs quick enough. I don't know where I'm going with these metaphors.
They're just breaking down.
Yeah, jeez. The Sega Dreamcast released as a 128-bit console, in an effort to one-up what Nintendo had done with its previous console. Moreover, their Dreamcast released with a built-in modem, allowing players to experience something brand new, online play. Not to mention, as we've now come to expect from Sega, the Dreamcast released a full year ahead of its competition before the PlayStation 2 released. In early 2001, disappointed with its console, Sega discontinued the Dreamcast. They decided from this point on to focus not on consoles but on third-party development. And for the first time, Sega did poorly in Japan. By the time the PlayStation 2 released, it had updated hardware that gave it extra oomph over the Dreamcast. It had a DVD player built right in, and Sony learned from their earlier successes and pushed heavy and expensive advertising for their console. However, Sony did not place much importance on online play at first, and their initial consoles released were exclusively offline variants. The real competition here was likely the most famous of all competitions. It was the PlayStation 2 versus the Xbox versus the GameCube. Where the PlayStation 2 used DVDs to push its games, the GameCube used these optical discs that were roughly half the size of normal discs. Additionally, the GameCube released at a mere cost of $200, $100 less than the PS2, granting it far greater accessibility. Additionally, while it supported its usual array of family-friendly games in Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, and Pikmin, Nintendo had long last decided to dip its toes into more mature games. Releases such as Eternal Darkness or Resident Evil 4 allowed Nintendo to leech a little bit of Sony's audience. Mere months after the GameCube's release, Microsoft released the Xbox in America. This tank of a machine offered 8 gigabytes of storage capacity for downloading games and saving files directly to the console. The Xbox Live debuted shortly after its release as a subscription-based service for certain advantages, and it performed remarkably. And Daniel, you were right. Our very first episode covered achievements, and I had an incorrect memory of when Xbox Live was released. Turns out, extremely quickly after the very first Xbox console released.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, the standard at this time was to continue producing and selling a console until its parent company had designed and developed the next console, at which point the older console would stop being made. Sony, however, decided to announce that the PS2 would continue regular sales until demand declined. This small offer was enough to push PS2 as a total titan of the competition. Now, now we have the shriveled, sun-baked shark that was Sega, clutching at scraps of its former success. Nintendo was a powerhouse in name only. Its once glistening mane was disheveled and tossed awry. The Gorilla PlayStation and the Eagle Xbox were nicely settling into metaphors that I'm, for some reason, holding on to.
Okay. I was gonna say, pushes up glasses. Excuse me, gorillas are herbivores, but I think they do occasionally eat meat, don't they?
Yeah,
I think
so.
a predator. All right.
I win.
All right, I love it.
The PS2 sold 150 million copies, again outselling all others combined. Xbox sold 24 million, GameCube sold 22 million, Dreamcast stumbled aimlessly at 10 million. At this point, I would say rather objectively that Sony had begun to win the overall war. But it focused only on consoles. Nintendo continued to cash in on its handheld market. With Sega now out of the way, the Game Boy Advance managed to push 81 million units, exponentially higher than all its competitors combined. Still, in count of combined units, Nintendo was still outsold by Sony. Now I must confess, this next conflict would end up being my favorite, and I'll spoil the surprise ahead of time. I'm a Nintendo nerd. The former giant was seemingly fading into the background before this new generation of awesomeness took form. This was an exploding age for consoles of all kinds, and all three systems experienced major shortages at their launches, and afterwards as well. Xbox 360's shortage continued for several months after its release, while the Wii's continued even after 2 holiday seasons. And for the first time in Sony's lifespan, the PlayStation 3 saw the least demand. This was also where Microsoft began listening to the wrong people. We wouldn't see the results of this mistake until the next generation, but there was an interesting similarity between the 7th generation consoles. All three featured external utility, such as storing photos, listening to music, browsing the internet, as well as offering the functionality of connecting to USB sticks and SD cards. Initially, the Xbox 360 sold with a higher quality DVD and music player, and as the years went on, would release other features such as Netflix streaming, internet radio, and the short-lived HD DVD drive, which was a standard that was quickly flattened by Blu-ray. In addition to Xbox Live, we now had the PlayStation Network and Wii's Wi-Fi connection. Their focus branched from simply having the best games to now having the best online content. Smaller indie titles available online became a huge selling point. Avatars also became a thing during this generation, the fictitious face of anonymity for every player. Nintendo had its Mii's, Xbox had their avatars, and Sony came out with the PlayStation Home as a form of player housing where people could show off their trophies and the like. Additionally, only the Wii initially had backwards compatibility with the GameCube. The Wii also offered the Virtual Console, which allowed official emulation of older titles from the NES, SNES, N64, and many Sega consoles as well. All this not to mention the extremely family-friendly advertising Nintendo pushed. I still remember those Wii commercials with the Japanese fellows going from door to door to introduce the Wii to American families, bowing and offering a Wiimote. That and the Wii's extremely unconventional style of controlling the games. Do you remember those commercials?
I don't think so, but I think that was a major function of us not having we didn't have like satellite or cable at that point in my life. We had pretty much signed off on television. I was playing things on my Xbox and on the internet and stuff. I didn't see much for TV commercials at that point.
Yeah, because I remember the ads were very strange because of course the controller was very strange, and then also like the games that they played required movement. It was a completely unconventional and unpredictable kind of pushing or advertising push. Note that I didn't mention the Virtual Boy once at all here. Well, Nintendo's known for taking risks. And while the Virtual Boy was a titanic failure, the Wii was somehow an overwhelming success. The N64 had its weird controllers where you only had access to one movement scheme at a time unless you had 3 hands. The GameCube nailed their controllers well while simultaneously taking a weird turn with its discs. Anyway, at the end of the day, Nintendo retook its lead in a major way. The Wii controlled its competition just shy of 100 million copies, while the PS3 and Xbox 360 tied completely even at 70 million, 7-0. So this era of console warring was my favorite not just because Nintendo clawed its way back, but because even the losing consoles did incredibly well. At this point... Sorry?
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, that's pretty crazy. 70 million each. That's a pretty impressive deadlock.
Yeah.
Clear winner.
Yeah. So at this point we saw...
I'm sorry. I was just going to say
son of a
real
gun.
quick. I know I'm a jerk. That's how I like to see it, because it means that everybody is putting out their best work. They don't have a clinch. They don't have a clinch on the market. They're not monopolizing. So everybody's a little bit worried about what the competition's doing. So they're pushing out their best work.
Yeah. Now, at this point, we saw the third handheld war as well. While the second war lacked almost all competition for Nintendo, Sony had decided at last to pick a fight this time round. They released their PlayStation Portable, or PSP, and sold a whopping 82 million copies, but that still barely crested half of the Nintendo DS's colossal 150 million sales. High on their own fumes, Nintendo would then release the Wii U. Though it had an interesting concept, it was both a halvesy of their previous Wii with motion controls and what would come 5 years later as the Switch with portable gaming. Nintendo released their Freak of Nature, that I also bought, in 2012, 2 years ahead of the PS4 and Xbox One. Now, we're almost totally caught up. So, the Wii had one glaring downfall despite outselling its competition. It did not offer immediate HD resolutions for its game, as Nintendo had never been ultra focused on graphical fidelity, I guess you could say. The Wii U would share this downfall. Though now pushing rudimentary HD resolutions, the Xbox One and PS4 would end up pushing 4K as a resolution in time, something that the Wii U wasn't even capable of. Now, as this war is still technically continuing, I can at least say that the Nintendo's weak start with the Wii U has turned into an absolute wrecking ball with its breakout hit, the Switch. Oh, and remember that mistake by Microsoft I mentioned earlier? Yeah, they for some reason thought that their gaming audience would be more interested in the non-gaming utility of the Xbox One. Their first major ad campaign focused on everything but their games and lost them a massive portion of their fan base. Their stock crashed. I myself purchased the Xbox One, if only for access to the continued Halo franchise. Since the release of Halo 4, however, I have not even touched my Xbox One. In fact, it remains boxed up from my move 4 years ago. We've also struck an era rich in smartphones. This affects both our handheld sales and even our console numbers as well. While I love my 3DS to bits, I also fear that another handheld system may never be released. My phone cannot at all compare to my 3DS in terms of power, but it seems people are just more interested in being nickel and dime to death than they are in playing quality games at the moment. Now, what's
referring to microtransactions?
Of course, yes. Now, what's really interesting about the console wars, this is the finishing point for me, is that there was actually a game released that actualized them. There's a game called Hyperdimension Neptunia that released for the PS3 in 2010 in Japan and then 2011 everywhere else. The entire game is a parody of the console wars and is heavy in references to games, anime, other forms of media. I see this game advertised all the time on Steam, as it seems to have 1,000 iterations. It's very, very popular. It has like overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. And what's interesting about it is that every single character, like playable character in it, is based on a gaming company. Like the main character Neptune is based on the unreleased Sega Neptune, for example. It was also the Sega Neptune was also called the 32X. It just never came out though.
Yeah, there was a lot there. Holy. That's a comprehensive. You weren't lying when you said you had a wall of text.
I got really into it.
Awesome.
It was both fun to formulate and fun to read.
Excellent. Yeah, and it was very fun to listen to. Actually, I was well educated just in listening to you. So thank you very much, Jeff. And at this point, I am going to take over, and I'm going to cover what's happening in the near future for the console wars. We're talking about 2020, 2021, when they're talking about releasing the next console. What are we at? Generation 9?
No, I think Generation 7 right now.
Generation 7.
8.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I don't
know. let's just take 8. So I'm going to start with Xbox. Because in all of this, was Xbox the gorilla or the rhinoceros? I don't remember.
It was an eagle?
Okay.
Jeez. What kind of rhinoceros would fight a gorilla?
The one that was eating its banana, I tell you. So
an
Xbox,
eagle is a much better match. I'm going to beat this into the ground!
I'm going to leave this alone. So we're talking about Project Scarlet from the Xbox. Now, I'm not sure what you know about Project Scarlet. And it's kind of unclear to me if that's what they're referring to as their next generation, or if maybe it's like a functionality, like a back-end kind of functionality. But pulled right from Microsoft's website, the Xbox website, there's a kind of a description of what Project Scarlet is, and here's what it says. Project Scarlet will set a new bar for console power, speed, and performance, arriving holiday 2020. I imagine that means Christmas time? 2020. So we're talking about a little bit better than a year from where we're sitting today, right alongside Halo Infinite. With a custom design AMD processor, high bandwidth GDDR6 memory, and a next generation solid state drive, Project Scarlet will give developers the power they need to bring their creative visions to life. Thousands of games across 4 console generations will look and play best on Project Scarlet. So it does sound like it's maybe a working name for their next console. It might be Xbox Scarlet or Xbox Project Scarlet. I'm not really sure exactly.
Well, I hope it's not Xbox 2.
Well, it does kind of guarantee the next 358 Xboxes, though, doesn't it?
Of course, yes.
So that was kind of an interesting blip on things. It doesn't really have too much to do with the rest of the what I'm going to talk about for Xbox, but I thought it was neat, anyways. So there was a con. Now I don't remember what the con was, so you'll have to forgive me. Where Xbox Live kind of came out and they talked about how they were bringing support to 3 mobile titles from Gameloft: the Asphalt 9 Legends, Asphalt 8 Airborne, and Dragon Mania Legends. And the reason why this is impressive, why it sounds like a fairly kind of rudimentary, not rudimentary, but commonplace announcement, not really worth writing home to mom about. But what this means is that Xbox Live services are now going to be heading over to mobile. So things like leaderboards, friend lists, achievements, and stuff like that, they're foraying into the mobile market. The Xbox Live.
I thought you said MOBA. I was like, what?
No, mobile okay. Market. Mobile. I think I was trying to say mobile and mobile, and it came out as kind of the bastard child.
Or MOBAs.
Yeah, and they also they did something similar when they brought Cuphead, which was formerly a Microsoft exclusive. They brought it over to the Switch. It also came with Xbox Live Gold, or just Xbox Live services. So what we're seeing is that while Xbox may be soundly losing the console war this generation, as of July, Xbox One sales topped out at 41 million, while PS4 is ringing in over the $100 million mark.
Dollar or unit?
Unit, my mistake. 100 million unit. So yeah, very very soundly beaten by the Sony console. It's interesting that they're developing this kind of background thing. They also have their Play Anywhere, Xbox Play Anywhere. It all but eliminated the notion of Xbox One exclusives in 2016 by bringing its biggest games to PC with cross-buy support, no less. So they're kind of, again, just supports this whole kind of back-end background thing. It appears that with the back-end support Microsoft is bringing to cross-platforms and even to PC, they want to be to the consoles what Steam is to the PC. So providing services while still offering a hardware option. I don't think the Xbox is done. They're going to keep, like I said, with the Xbox Scarlet. They're just not willing to put all their eggs in that basket when, you know, it does seem like the eagle has landed and might be struggling to take off again. How'd I do? my predator metaphor not quite up to snuff, eh? That was off the cuff.
It went over my head.
Moving on, we're going to talk about the PlayStation 5 from Sony.
Leave the animal metaphors to me.
Okay, well, then I expect you to be right there with me.
You can use plant metaphors.
Okay, well, I need more planning for that, though. Plants take a long time to grow.
There's I can't even think of any plants. Yeah, good luck.
All right, and then there's PlayStation 5, a machine that already sounds like a natural extension of the philosophy that fueled the PlayStation 4. So those philosophies are focus on hardware that plays games well first and foremost. So the hardware that plays the games well. So what they've got there, what they're bragging about anyways, is their beefy 8-core AMD Ryzen CPU. You're talking about an 8K resolution output, despite the fact that most televisions today they can't even put out 8K, and the ones that do, are in the way out of my price range. We're talking probably $5,000-$6,000.
Oof.
Yeah, they're up there. Also, PSVR compatible, of course. We talked about VR and AR last episode, so I figured that was important to note. But the big take home for their hardware is this brand new SSD. Now, I noticed that Xbox also bragged about a brand new SSD. I'm not sure if it's the same one. I wasn't able to confirm or deny that. But they say that this SSD has a higher bandwidth than any existing SSD on the market for PCs. Now, that's important to note because I was, for the last little while, beginning to believe that the consoles were never going to be up to snuff with PCs again. With this generation of consoles, the PCs have just run away in computing ability, in the last few years. And so I figured that anytime that a new console, after it's gone through R&D and all of the marketing time and logistics to, make as many as they need to, the computer components that they've built it with are already going to be, several generations obsolete. So I was thinking that at this point, the console war was going to, at least for people that are interested in computing capabilities and graphical capabilities, that it was going to be kind of a thing of the past. Not very, a neat parlor trick, maybe play those games every now and then, but nothing if you're like, it wouldn't hold a candle to the PC. So this kind of perked my interest here. Kind of my ears went up here. A higher bandwidth than any existing SSD on the market for PCs. Again, those numbers weren't confirmed, so that's just take it with a grain of salt.
It's also a wordplay that you have to pay attention to because I would say that maybe that's true for currently, but by the time the system is released, computers will undoubtedly have better SSDs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree completely. One of the things that they do have access to is that huge mass. Like they can buy, they can buy them by the boatload, and so they can get really great pricing on them. Whereas you or I are going to have to pay $400-$500 for a quality SSD. They're going to get them for, pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
But I digress. Moving back to PlayStation's philosophies that fueled the PlayStation 4. So we're talking about a company that caters to what the biggest commercial developers want for features. We're going to continue to see that sort of thing. And it's going to operate ostensibly on a closed ecosystem. So exclusive games, PlayStation Network only multiplayer, that sort of thing. We can expect more of the same. I mean, why change what isn't broken, right? One of the neat things, though, this is neat because with the PlayStation 4, they bragged backward compatibility out the yin-yang. But they really kind of failed to deliver on what they were bragging. However, here they're actually putting some real numbers. They're talking about backward compatibility that spans the past 3 consoles. So not the original, but PlayStation 2, 3, and 4. And not every game, but they're boasting over 2,000 games are going to be backward compatible with the PlayStation 5. And all of them also available on the PlayStation Network. So that's kind of neat to see. And of course, they're going to continue to host the biggest prestige projects around, just by being, the titan of the past, decade or so
Right.
Yeah, so the PlayStation 5 is setting up to be a pretty massive powerhouse of at least horsepower. Um,
Yeah, and I will say that my foot in this war is mostly dedicated to Nintendo. Like I said, I got the Xbox because I wanted Halo, but I've even lost interest in Halo because Xbox was just such a failure of a console to me. The Xbox One specifically. But I will also say that though I really want the Switch because Nintendo, I also recognize that when the PS5 comes out, I'm gonna buy it. Like
yeah,
I'm saving money now so I can buy it as soon as it comes out.
fair enough. It'll probably release in the $700-800 mark, like they have been lately.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big barrier of entry for myself.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm saving now. I'm just like $10 aside every now and then, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I thought with your supervisor job you'd be rolling in the dough there.
I didn't take a raise.
Pretty sure you sleep on a bed of money.
Nope. I live in
Moving
Edmonton,
on.
man. It's expensive here.
Oh yeah, I know. The city's disgusting. Moving on to Nintendo Switch. Now, I have some pretty staggering numbers to throw at you. Some of them you've already quoted, but I'm gonna requote them just because they're in my notes and it'll help maybe for our listeners who maybe don't remember these numbers.
Pad out the time.
Yeah, yeah, because we need to do that. Okay, so 38 million sales for the Switch. That's as of June this year. 38 million sales for the Switch. 49 million units for the SNES Classic. 62 million units for the NES Classic. 75 million for the 3DS. 81 million for the Game Boy Advance. 101 million for the Wii. 120 million for the OG Game Boy. And a staggering 154 million units sold for the Nintendo DS. Now, those numbers are important because while Nintendo may seem like they haven't had much success recently, they command respect. That is impressive. And this next gen, they don't have a lot to announce at the moment. And the reason why is because Nintendo has had this kind of I don't know if it's a philosophy, but it seems to be a non-compete, where they do not want to compete with the big bads, the Xbox and the PlayStation, because maybe they just wouldn't do so well. So I think that they've started this cycle of releasing in between their releases. So we got the Switch just a few years ago. We're going to get the next gen on the Sony and the Microsoft platforms probably next year. So we're not going to see another Nintendo platform for another maybe 3-4 years from today.
Yeah, because the Wii U came out at an odd time, and then as a result of the Wii U, the Nintendo Switch came out at an odd time, right?
Yeah,
Like
and
not
I think
in line
that's
with the other
strategic.
consoles. Yeah, well,
I think that's
so,
strategic. Yeah. But it is worth noting that 8 of the top 15, so I found the top 15 best-selling consoles of all time, and 8 of the top 15 belong to Nintendo. So that's a pretty significant eagle feather in their cap, if you know what I'm getting at. But there are some fair criticisms to level at Nintendo. For starters, their
Eagle? That's the
Eagle.
Xbox.
But they stole its feather.
Oh my gosh.
See what I'm getting at?
Full circle.
They ate its lunch. As I was saying, fair criticisms to level at Nintendo. For starters, their main competitors, Sony and Microsoft, are clearly gearing themselves up for a launch of their new systems. When the two companies inevitably reveal that what they've been working on, there is the possibility the next generation could make the Nintendo Switch feel antiquated. After all, the Switch, which struggles to run a game like Fortnite that can even be played on a cell phone, is not capable of the same technical prowess of the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4. As the gap between the console's abilities seem to widen, at some point, even the most casual gamer will opt for the more graphical, cinematical, is that a word?
No. But keep going.
Cinematical option. So there is that criticism. Now, the defense of that criticism is that, as you mentioned before, Nintendo has never really been interested in being the cutting edge graphical kind of thing and choosing more to have a more cartoony kind of game. I'm thinking of Pikmin, I'm thinking of all the Mario stuff, more family friendly stuff, quite a bit less on the realism scale, and therefore, don't need to worry about the 8K stuff. So there is possibly a defense for that. Now, I think that the market, like I mentioned earlier, as the gap widens, I don't know if they're going to be able to maintain that level of non-commitment to graphical updates.
Right.
The second criticism that we can level at Nintendo is that there have been, to my knowledge, no major new franchise releases in years. They're still cashing in on the likes of Mario and Zelda, but how long are they going to be able to keep relying on those same ones to sell copies, or not copies, but sell units?
Well, what about
You know what I'm
Splatoon?
getting at?
Splatoon, rather.
Okay, so I've heard of Splatoon.
That's a new franchise for Nintendo, isn't it?
Is it as big? Is it as impressive?
I've
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. I've never seen it. Is it making waves, I guess? Is it as impressive? I guess it's probably going to take years. I know Mario's been around for decades and Zelda's been around for decades. So,
but if you don't want
to, we'll tell.
If you don't want to argue Splatoon, I would say Pikmin was probably the newest. So GameCube.
Right. So we've got. Did Pikmin come out for the Wii and the Wii U as well?
It did, yes.
Ah, all right. So there's potential. I guess we can say there's potential. But it's not like the Far Cries. It's not like the Modern Warfare, like the Call of Duties. It's not like Halos, where there's just game after game after game of just incredible releases.
There was Xenoblade Chronicles. Have you heard of that one? That one's a big one.
I don't think so. I'm not the Nintendo apologist that you are, though.
I'm not an apologist.
Enthusiast.
You take that back.
It's probably the right word. Okay. Enthusiast. So, in conclusion, it's difficult to accurately predict what Nintendo has up their sleeves, as they always release a half generation ahead/behind of the other big players. So hype for Nintendo's down right now, while hype for Xbox, PS5, and the new Google Stadia, which I'll cover in a minute, is at all-time highs. With impressive new hardware in these monsters, coupled with the lack of horsepower in the Switch and no huge genre-defining titles, arguable, Nintendo may be setting up for or settling in for the backstage. Or they may just surprise us all over again, as they are apt to do.
Yeah, they're very good at that.
They are, yeah. With the notably with it seems like ever since the GameCube, it's like every generation has released something staggering, something earth-shatteringly new. And the GameCube is arguable because it was just these cute little discs, right? These little 3-inch across CD-ROM style discs, and they were really cool. They were cute. They were fun, but maybe that doesn't count when you compare it against like the motion sensitive Wii remotes and the optional nunchuck and the steering wheels and and with the Wii U, the ability to take it away from the television, to play it as a handheld. And now with the Switch, that same kind of functionality, but the ability to disengage your controller from your unit. Like, I mean, it seems like every new generation brings with it some really groundbreaking hardware changes, and to that, the other consoles are playing catch up. I'm talking about the PlayStation. What does that wand that they have that kind of does the same thing as the Wii controller?
The PlayStation wand.
Called. Sure.
I don't know.
Let's call it that. But you know what I'm getting at. It's the same thing, but it's a generation behind, right? So Nintendo does seem to be pushing at least the I don't want to say hardware because it's not like the computer components, but the physicality of the game. They seem to be breaking ground in that area. So there is hope. There is hope for Nintendo. Don't get me wrong. I'm not writing them off just yet. Now
You seem to be writing them off a little bit. The Switch had magnificent success.
Well, we're still only at 38 million as of June. So
how long has it been out?
Maybe we've crested 40 million since then. How long has it been? It's been out for a year and a half.
Okay, how long has
Quite a
PS4 and Xbox One been out?
I really don't know.
That's a huge factor in the
6
numbers.
years?
Yeah, exactly. That's like 4 times as long.
You're right. So, as we mentioned before in another episode, Daniel is very judgmental when it comes to graphics. I really like to be wowed by the 1080p's and the 4Ks and the 60 frames per second and the 330 hertz and whatever else. Those things get me. And
I do have to say, again, in defense of Nintendo, there's always that Nintendo nerd everywhere you go. But in defense of Nintendo, the Switch is actually a very powerful machine. I would say it's definitely weaker than the PS. I'm sorry, can you hear that?
I heard a little something.
There are children screaming in the hallway. How dare they interrupt us?
Shake your fist at them.
No, the Switch is obviously. I think it's. I'm not sure about how it compares to the Xbox One, but I know it's actually a little bit weaker than the PS4. But it is very formidable as far as like its hardware is concerned.
Yes, I did hear that for many of the they were bragging or they were boasting 60 frames per second at their reveal. However, most of the games don't support that, so they're still only doing 30 FPS for most of the games.
Yeah.
So there is that.
And also, actually, if you play the game on the controller screen, it's I think it's locked at 30 frames per second, but on the TV or something, it gets boosted to 60 frames for the games that are compatible for that.
Oh yeah, right. So we're gonna move on to the one I saved this for last because I am the most excited about this one out of everything so far. I don't have a storied history with any gaming console. I've owned an Xbox, the OG Xbox, and an Xbox 360. I've owned a Wii and a SNES and a 64. I've never owned a PlayStation unit, and I've never owned a portable. So I don't have that much skin in the game, I guess. So Google Stadia has me super excited, and you'll find out why in a moment here. So before I started studying for this here show, I had only obliquely heard about the Stadia before. So when I actually started sinking my teeth into this, I actually got palm sweats, and I'm sure my heart rate started increasing because this to me is groundbreaking. This is the next tier, the next level of gaming. So announced earlier this year, the Google Stadia will run on anything that can run the Chrome app. So the Google Chrome app, Stadia will run on anything. So this includes PCs, tablets, phones, TVs, pretty much anything that you can put the Google Chrome app on, the Stadia will run on. So you may have guessed by now, there is no console. This is so maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't deserve to be stacked up against these people as a console in the console wars. But it's a new spirit to gaming, I guess, and it really excites me. So I wanted to throw it in here. It promises a Netflix-like experience for video games. So it's a cloud-based video game service. No buying a console. All data is handled in the cloud by Google's impressive hardware. So you don't even have to worry about your own hardware. It's just Google. Google handles everything, all the down, all the up. Well, I guess you have to handle the down, but all the server communication, everything is done on their end. They're able to push out 4K resolution at 50 frames per second with surround sound on your phone.
I'm confused. How does that even work? If your phone's incapable of 4K, you wouldn't be able to do 4K.
Well, that's fair. You obviously have to have the device that will handle it as well. But I'm talking about data, being the data transfer, right? Being able to, on their end, be able to push out that kind of stuff to you. It's also a single ecosystem for gaming across all devices. So the same achievements, the same leaderboards, everything across all platforms. Now this, I had a little bit of a gripe for this. And the reason being is because I don't play, when I was playing Hearthstone competitively, I never did ladder on my phone. Because the odds of you misclicking, the odds of you accidentally sending something the wrong way, the odds of something not quite playing out you didn't have the same functionality as you have with a mouse and cursor as you do with like just the tip of your finger. I don't have big beefy hands, but even my small little French man hands, I would not often, but it happened enough that I'd misclick and get the wrong reaction for what I wanted, and I could very easily lose a game when I was playing, at the rank 4 and better. I could very easily lose. I guess I never made it to rank better than rank 4 was the best I ever did, I think. But either way.
Wow, you're so good.
Yeah. I derailed myself. Oh,
I hope.
Yeah, so you're not gonna have the same functionality on your handheld device with a touchscreen as you will on your computer, unless maybe it's a larger tablet. You might be able to get away with it on the tablet, but I do find, and harkens back to the woodenness of the Elder Scrolls blades that I talked about earlier. While I'm getting used to it, it will never be as good as having a controller in hand. So I'm not sure that having leaderboards and stuff like that across all platforms is a fantastic idea. But again, that's a small gripe. It does have its own controller, but it's not required to use the Stadia. You can do it, like I said, with your touch screens. You can also use other like your Steam controllers will connect with the Stadia as well. So you'll be able to obviously, since it's not an actual piece of hardware, you can just connect with your computer, you can connect with your TV. As long as your controller is able to pair with it, you're good to go. However, the Stadia controller does come with one important addition. It has Wi-Fi built right in. And what's neat about that is that the controller has the potential to communicate directly with Google's, their servers, rather than having to go to an intermediary device, like say in the case of an Xbox, where you have to use the Xbox controller to communicate with the Xbox, and then the Xbox communicates with the server. You know what I'm saying? You get to take out that middleman by having a Wi-Fi enabled controller.
Right.
So that's kind of neat. It probably speed things up just a hair. Maybe you're talking about a few, just a few milliseconds, but it's worth it when you're talking about high-end gaming. And it also has some important game developers that are backing the project. So Bethesda, which we talked about last week, they've got the Doom Eternal game that they're already announcing for the Stadia, as well as the other consoles as well. It also has a gaggle of other titles, so Doom 2016, Rage 2, Elder Scrolls Online, and Wolfenstein Youngblood, all from Bethesda. We've got Ubisoft in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. They're promising Just Dance, Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Tom Clancy's The Division 2, Trials Rising, which I've never heard of, and The Crew 2.
Trials?
Trials Rising? I've never heard of that.
Trials?
Yeah.
Isn't that the dirt bike game?
If it is, that would explain why I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it is definitely that. That's what it is.
Okay. Well, that's exciting for if that's your game of choice. Absolutely. I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but hey, welcome. uh,
I can't believe you've never heard of Trials.
no,
That's
like
popular across all platforms.
Excite Bike. Excite Bike. I had that one.
Well, close enough. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like a side view of the map that your bike has to go across.
Okay. Okay. So other notable games that are coming for the Stadia are Final Fantasy 15, Destiny 2, and Mortal Kombat 11. So those are worth looking forward to. The next thing that the Stadia promises is it promises no cheating and no hacking. Apparently, the way the hardware is set up, it's not possible. Now, they're not the first ones to promise this, and all others before them have been wrong. But maybe Google can pull it off. I mean, they
No.
got pretty deep pockets. I don't know. That's their promise anyway. Since everything is handled on their end, and their end is hyper secure,
Yeah,
they
just hack
promise
them.
that it's unhackable.
Just DDoS them.
Yeah, I guess so. Hey.
DDoS? What's that one where you? Yeah, DDoS. Yeah. That's
Yeah, denial of service.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. They boast unlimited crossplay with other consoles that support the same games. So things like Fortnite and Overwatch that you can play on other consoles are going to be cross-playable with the Stadia as well.
Hold the phone. If you play something like the Xbox, probably no. That's not true. I don't. I shouldn't make claims. Go on. I was gonna say, doesn't the Xbox have access to Chrome? But I don't think it does. It has its own little internet thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I couldn't speak to that. So it has a free version. The free version is not going to be available right away. They're having a soft launch next month. Actually, the month of November 2019 is a soft launch for the Google Stadia. However, it's going to launch with what they call the Founders Pack, which has, I think it's $130 investment for you to get the Founders Pack, which gives you a controller and a Chromecast Pro, I believe. But the free version will be coming sometime, I think, first quarter next year. Now, don't get it twisted. Google Stadia is not offering an instant game library just for a subscription price. It's an a la carte storefront, or a la carte for those of you that aren't French, storefront that
Say it in
charges
French again.
per game. A la carte.
Ugh. Go on.
So it's a storefront that charges per game. Just like buying a game on the PlayStation Store or going to your local EB Games, you do have to pay for each individual title. So all it really does is it affords you the opportunity to play AAA games, indie games, much like Steam, but play them on any device. And it also, this the final point, it's able to function across a variety of internet speeds, though its minimum recommendation is about 10 megabits per second down. So, I mean, there's everyone on the planet can manage 10 megabit down, but that's not the 4K. I can
Okay.
if I'm if I'm sitting where I'm sitting right now beside my router, I can manage, I think, 15 or 18.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it's exciting. Now, that's not going to be your 4K resolution, your surround sound audio. It's not going to be any of that kind of stuff. It'll be stereo. It'll be 720. It won't be amazing.
30
but
FPS.
It will be playable. Probably 30 FPS, yeah, but it will be playable. So, yeah, so that's how it all shakes out. That's the big four that I've got on my radar. There is also an Apple contender. I wasn't able to pull up very much, and honestly, I've been really unenthused with Apple lately. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, I don't want to do it. But they're calling it the Apple Arcade, and I guess it's going to be quite similar to what the Google Stadia is boasting. Probably the spiritual competitor for that one. Probably do a lot of the same functionalities, but I'm not sure. Have you heard of the Apple Arcade?
No.
No. All right.
I pay no
So
attention to Apple.
I guess more to come in the future as it develops, I guess.
I'm not willing to spare my attention span for Apple, and I mean that in the most insulting way possible.
Oh, I see that.
I do not like Apple.
Can you tell me why?
Well, here's a story all about me and how my life got turned upside down. Let's not go down that path. No, I remember when I was Apple started as a fascination to me because I every time I went to visit my aunt Barbara, I believe they had an Apple, but it was like old. I was like 7, right? So it was this old machine, and they had all these really cool games on it that my computer at home didn't have. But my computer was Windows and theirs was Apple, and I was like, oh, it must be because Apple that they have such good games. And then I went to school, and our school at the time, this was, in a different town than my later grades. Uh, the school had just a whole host of PCs, and I was like, oh, I guess I can't get the games on these. And but the PCs were they ran super smooth. There was like no problems with, not that I was super critical of machines, computers at the time at my age, but when I moved to the next town, it was all Mac computers, and they were so clunky and stupid that it just left a bad taste in my mouth. That when I grew older, and I'm another thing, this is sort of this is sort of mixed in together. But as I grew older, I'm kind of I'm a lone wolf when it comes to like what's popular. Should you follow it? Should you not? So when Apple exploded in popularity like 10, 15 years ago, I wanted nothing to do with it. Just purely on the fact that it was so popular, I lost interest in it. So that, and then when I moved out after graduating and I started building my own computer, I realized that building an Apple computer is not fun because they take all control away from you. And I need if it's my property, I want absolute control over everything that goes into it. So with the PC, you're like, okay, I want this part, this part, and they're like, okay, take it. And you're like, okay, sweet. And that's it. It's completely up to you to find out which parts are compatible and all that, but that's fine. If you want the control, then PC just totally opens up their arms to you. And Apple, I'm not sure how it is nowadays, but at the time, Apple didn't offer anything to me. They were like, no, you get it this way or the highway, basically. And I was like, okay, bye.
Yeah, there wasn't much for customizability or, upgradability. You wanted to upgrade your Apple, you bought a new unit.
Yeah.
You didn't buy like an upgraded this component to that component and just plug and play and away you go.
Yeah, so because of that, and basically that alone, I really, and like iPhones now, everyone I know at work that has an iPhone hates it, and it's because the new iPhone doesn't have like an earphone jack and stuff like that, and you're like, what is, and another thing, every time so I live across the street from a mall. Every time I go into the mall, there's this Apple store. Their Apple technicians that are supposed to help you are called geniuses. How pretentious is that? Oh my god, it sickens me. It makes me so disappointed in society that they think that they're okay with being called genius. Genius is a huge compliment to someone. You can't just say that willy-nilly. You can't just assign that to some nerd who wants to be a technician. Like it's just I could complain for hours apparently.
I can see you feel very strongly about this.
I hate Apple so much. I think I hate them now more than I did like 2 minutes ago.
After being able to voice all this and air some grievances, I do have an iPhone, and at this point I have an iPhone 8 is my version that I'm using right now. and pretty well the major reason why I continue to buy iPhones is because it's what I know. When I pick up an Android or anything else, I feel really confused by the operating system. I don't feel like I know how to do anything. And it's the same when I hop on a Mac. I do not enjoy Mac computers whatsoever. I actually had to use one just last Tuesday, and I was so hamstrung. I couldn't do a thing. I had to get Buddy over yonder to come and give me a hand with just like how to close a program, because it's not there's no X in the top right corner for you to click. Like how do you close this thing? So yeah, it was not wonderful. I like the iPhone well enough for its ability. It seems adequately powerful, and the camera's pretty decent. The headphone jack is not a major issue for me until I want to listen to something while I'm falling asleep, because my phone, I usually run it out of battery by the end of the day, so I need to plug it in. Can't listen to anything unless I get the Bluetooth pods, which can be really pricey. They're starting to come down in price. There's a lot of competitors that are making some really affordable ones. But yeah, interesting anyways. Oh, I apologize if you can hear that.
Oh, it's extremely loud.
Oh, delightful. That's my wife walking in.
So before we end out this episode, I did have a few more things about the console wars that I wanted to talk about, namely our history with the console wars. Because I had when I was a kid, I had a Super Nintendo and a Sega Master System, and I got to enjoy the best of both worlds because the Sega Master System had some really cool titles on it. Super Nintendo obviously had a lot of really fun stuff. So whenever I went to visit a friend, they just had the same console as me. So it wasn't like, it was a weird era where everyone I knew had a Super Nintendo. So nobody was jealous of anyone, nobody was envious, because we all had the same thing. Everyone had Super Mario World. Some people had Castlevania, other people had Secret of Mana or Chrono Trigger, and we just borrowed games from each other essentially. And it was just it was a very peaceful time, even though there was an actual war going on between Nintendo and Sega and stuff. Because I owned both systems, I didn't feel that, and I was a kid too. But only owning one console makes a huge difference versus controlling or owning both the consoles or all three consoles, right?
Were you subject to any of that sort of implied shame for owning a Sega system?
No, the implied shame was from the Nintendo. And no, I was too young. I liked the Nintendo. I would say when I got to the N64 era, I loved my N64. I loved it so much. I would say that I sort of experienced an interesting dilemma with the Saturn, because I only knew one person who had a Sega Saturn, and the Sonic game they had for it was really good. And I was like, man, all I want to do is play the Saturn. And I offered trading the as a borrowing thing, like trade the N64 for his Saturn for like a week, and he was like, no. And I was like, oh, because I wanted to play Sonic so much. But we did end up trading our N64 with my brother's friend who had a PlayStation. And so we enjoyed the PlayStation for a week or two, and that was actually really interesting because the PlayStation had things like, what's that game where it's like there's a gun at the bottom center of the screen and it shoots bubbles, like you had to, it was like reverse Tetris where you had to match color bubbles up with each other and they would all pop. Bubble Blast or something, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a pretty huge franchise. I just can't remember the name of it, but that was so addictive as like a 10-year-old. I really, really liked that. I would say the era after that was also odd for me because I won the Xbox. I was in Air Cadets and we entered a raffle. We only put one ticket in, and we won the first prize thing. And I was like, oh, perfect. And so there was no. I really, really, really wanted the GameCube. I wanted it so badly, but I was also like in this weird situation of having this free console that's much. Well, I would say much more powerful. I would say a little bit more powerful than the GameCube. That had this awesome Halo game that I'd never heard of. Like it was just like a weird, awesome time for me. That I say weird because I had an awesome system, but I still wanted this other awesome system. And at this point, I wasn't paying any attention to Sony. Even though Sony was doing best, I had no interest, no curiosity, nothing. And I'm interested about you because I know you had the N64 and you had the Xbox. What was going through your mind in terms of like other console availability and stuff like that? Do you have any interest?
So I don't know if I chronicled this in our first couple of episodes, but when I first got a Super NES, I was young enough that that it scared me. Like I didn't want to lose, so I didn't want to play. I didn't
Right.
want to play because I didn't want to lose. So it took me quite a while to warm up to it at first. Once I got a little bit of proficiency with it, then I was in there like a dirty shirt. Um, but as far as being aware of the console wars, I would have to say I wasn't really aware until about the N64. Um, and I was only aware in the later cycle of the N64 because a friend of mine had a PlayStation 1 and I had never seen one of those before. And he wasn't an old friend, not an old chum, like he's somebody I had just met and kind of went over to his place for the first time. And I must have been, oh gosh, by this point, probably about 12 years old, and or even 13. And he was showing me this Ace Flight Simulator game or something like that he was playing. And I was like, what is this thing? I've never heard of a PlayStation before. And I wasn't thrilled with it, mostly because the game looked too complex for me. And therein, I think we see kind of the real magic sauce, I guess, that the Nintendo was for me growing up. Right? It catered very, very well to my younger sensibilities, and even to a point when I got the original Xbox, I was in my mid to late teens. And I was already growing beyond the childish stuff. And when I saw my first PlayStation, it was too mature for me. Seeing all of like the instrument panels on the airplane cockpit and stuff like that, and how you're supposed to be able to use this information. I couldn't even understand this information. Never mind use it. So it was too much for me at that point.
Right.
So. It took until that point before I was even really aware of the competition, if you will. Another friend of mine, actually, Lauren, somebody that you know as well, he had a Sega Genesis, I believe, but we didn't really. His parents had some pretty strict rules on playtime, so whenever I would go over to his place, it was pretty much like, no, you have a friend over, you're not playing. So I didn't get to see very much of that. So yeah, it wasn't really until the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 when I was kind of in I don't know if it was junior high. It was either late junior high, early high school, something like that. And people started actually talking about the power and the functionality of these consoles, that I actually started to understand the metric, the things that they were actually comparing and measuring. And really at that point it started to take off for me. And I had a nostalgic fondness for the Nintendo stuff, but I departed from Nintendo at the Nintendo 64. I guess I had and still have a Nintendo Wii. My kids still play it pretty regularly. But that's the exception. I never had the GameCube. I never had the Wii U. I do not have the Switch, despite the fact that I want the Switch to play Zelda. But I departed from Nintendo pretty well at the 64 and started in with Xbox. So I really was invested in Xbox. I love the Halo franchise.
Did your loyalty totally flip? Where you're like, I don't care about Nintendo anymore?
Uh, I'm not going to say it flipped. There was a certain amount of indifference, but like I said, there was fondness still for the nostalgic factor. But I didn't develop a disdain for Nintendo just because I was an Xbox loyalist. So I
Well,
had
see,
to,
I was just gonna say that like when I had the Sega Master System and the Super Nintendo at the same time, it was interesting because those were my first consoles, and so I didn't have that initial realization of, oh, this game's only available on Nintendo. Like if I
Right.
want Mario, I only get it on the Nintendo, and if I want Sonic, I only get it on the Sega. I had both, so I was like, I had no dilemma when it came to which system I wanted to play because I had both of them. But when it came to times of N64 versus PlayStation or N64 versus the Sega Saturn, it was like, oh, now I don't have a Sega to play that new Sonic game. So, uh-oh, there's my dilemma. Suddenly I'm like, oh, I now I'm starting to get at this point in my life. I'm starting to get that. Oh, I need to buy if I want to play these also awesome games. I need to own multiple systems, but I couldn't obviously at the time.
yeah. It's important to note too that at this point in my life, we're talking about my kind of mid-teens, 14, 15, 16 years old. That's when I started getting into World of Warcraft, which is PC exclusive. So it wasn't possible. Not that it wasn't possible, but it did take me out of the console race kind of altogether. As soon as I started playing WoW, I really didn't play much. Like my Xbox just gathered dust. I only bought an Xbox 360 for Skyrim when it came out. So I mean, there's a big gap between the release of the original Xbox and the release of Skyrim. We're talking like a decade
Yeah.
of time. So while I did have the 360, I did not buy it right away, and I only bought it for pretty much the one game. I have had and continue to have several games. Probably have 30 360 games. Some of them I have never played, just because my interest in the 360 has waned so much. I'm more of a PC all the way kind of guy at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that when you got to that point, you had just transferred over to the PC around 2004, 2005. You were like, okay, PC all the way. The Wii came out at around the same time that World of Warcraft released, and I got Zelda for the Wii, and it was the Zelda. Oh, I'm blanking on its name.
Was that the Ocarina of Time remake?
No, it was Twilight Princess.
Oh, okay.
So Twilight Princess had released for the Wii and the GameCube at the same time. Just the way it released, because the GameCube was still a very much a live console and the Wii was a brand new one, so they were like, let's just release it for both. And of course, Twilight Princess looked a little bit better on the Wii, etc. But anyway, so I had it for the Wii, and Colton had it for the every name we mentioned are just friends between us. So don't expect to know these people for some reason.
We're
But
not going to explain every single person.
Exactly, yeah. Colton had a GameCube, and he had the Zelda on that. And he had just met me because I had just moved to town at the time. And so I was going to, like, youth group or something like that. And maybe he thought I was cool. I don't know. Every youth group, he just, glued to me and wanted to talk about Zelda. And it's interesting because by the time he realized that I had Zelda, I had already beaten Zelda. And I didn't just beat the game. I 100%. I love that game. I 100%ed it. I had nothing else to do. And so when he came to talk to me, I was like, I don't care. I'm I like the game, but I'm done it now, right? So so it was I just wanted to share that little memory because for some reason Colton just loved talking about Zelda, and I would always just push him off towards Jeffrey and let them talk. But it's it's interesting because maybe because of Zelda, even though World of Warcraft came out and I loved that game, I was just super attached to Zelda through the Wii, and whenever multiple friends were over, I much preferred playing like multiplayer Halo or something on the Xbox rather than playing World of Warcraft. Like I always had enough reason to stop playing World of Warcraft that even though I loved the game, I still had very much strong attachments to the Nintendo and Microsoft consoles. I would. I have this weird. I guess you could call it a closeted, pointless resentment of PlayStation. And like I said, just like with Apple, my resentment of PlayStation was only because it was so popular. I was like, no, Nintendo's better. Nintendo's like 120 years old. It survived everything, and like why should I turn my back on a company that has done so much good for me just because PlayStation has better graphics? And I was like, and it's expensive, and I just for some reason I couldn't get it out of my head that PlayStation was just it was like the mean big brother, and not even that. It was like the rich spoiled new kid that you're like, everyone hates him. That's what I felt like PlayStation was. But at this point in my life now, I don't know why I had the resentment, because I want the next console I'm probably going to buy is the PlayStation 5, and then hopefully the Switch in or around there. Maybe before, because the Switch is obviously a bit cheaper, but because like you, I not only do I want to play Zelda, which is a phenomenal success, but I also want to play Mario. This latest iteration of Mario has done remarkably well.
You talking about the Super Mario Maker?
No. The one where he has the hats. Odyssey?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That looks really good to me, and I would love to play it. I enjoyed Galaxy, Super Mario Galaxy on the Wii, and Super Mario Galaxy 2. I like both of those. I've never, even though Mario is very clearly a very family-friendly game, I love dark games. Like games like Dark Souls. It is a completely different like direction of interest than Mario, but I still love Mario. Like I can sit down and play Galaxy all day long. I have dreams of owning like Super Mario Sunshine on a modern console, because I owned it at one point, but I can't find it. So I have a GameCube, but I can't play Mario as a result. But like, Mario Sunshine was awesome. That's my favorite Mario game, and to this day I love all of the iterations of Mario, and I'm 100% convinced that Odyssey is also just even better than what people are saying it is. And I really want the Switch, and it's affordable, right? Like I said, I want the PS5, but the Switch is just it's so nice.
Yeah.
Also, a brief mention of the handhelds. Like I went through the history. I had the Game Boy Color, I had the Game Boy Advance, and then I had the DS, and the interesting leap of technology from those, like the Game Boy Color was just the normal Game Boy, but in color. It had nothing else other than color. The Game Boy Advance had, I think it was a 32-bit handheld, so it could do like Super Nintendo games, but it didn't have a light up screen, so it was kind of annoying to play. But then there was like the DS came out, and I was like, yeah, let's get the DS, and it came with Super Mario 64 for the DS, and I ended up lending that to the Bodwayne siblings, and they were either really rough with it, or they played it so much it just broke. So
Oh no.
I was like, after that, I was like, I don't have interest in playing this anymore, because I really only wanted it for Super Mario 64. But then flash forward, whatever, 5-10 years, and I got the current newest iteration of the 3DS, the DS, which is the new 3DS XL, and it's a total powerhouse, and I love every single game I have for it, and it's just like it. There's no way it can fail my expectations with every game I play. I have nothing like 5 stars. Like this console as a handheld is so remarkable that I do not at all wonder why it has 150 million sales.
Yeah, you're really selling it here. You make me want to run out and buy one right now.
Well, it has like access to old games like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. It has even older games like Chrono Trigger, for example. And then it has newer titles like the Fire Emblem series and stuff like that. Like it's just so flexible and versatile. Like there's no downsides to it. If you don't like the 3D, you can just turn it off. I don't know why people complain about the 3D when you can. It's literally a slider you can turn off, or make it medium strength or quarter strength. It's a slider. Anyway, I think this wraps up our episode. It went long. It was fun. I had no complaints. I mean, we're almost at 3 hours here. It was very, very good. And as always, everyone here can contact us on Twitter at Podcast TLDR. That's Podcast TLDR. At our email, which is tldrpodcast@gmail.com. And of course at YouTube, youtube.com/TLDR podcast. What's really interesting about that is, like, not even a week after we made our channel, another channel popped into existence called TLDR Podcasts. And I knew that they were, like, probably furious that we took the name. They have, like, this whole, like, their TLDR Podcasts is like a podcast of something. I don't know what it is specifically, but it's like a branch off of a main channel that has like 300,000 subscribers.
Oh wow!
So I'm like, yeah, suck it. But they're still, even though we popped up first in the search bar for the longest time, they've now, because they have so many subscribers, they've sort of squished us down a little bit. But you can still find us. Look up TLDR Podcast on YouTube and just scroll down a little bit. You will see us for absolute certainty. Just to specify, we are singular. TLDR Podcast, and they are TLDR Podcasts.
Yeah, at risk of sounding like an ad for their show.
Exactly.
Yeah, and probably worth mentioning too, it is now the month of October, and we are fast approaching Halloween. We are planning a Halloween-themed episode, and yeah, just kind of stay tuned for that. Should be a lot of fun. I am a sucker, whiny little baby that doesn't play horror games, and I'm gonna give some a try and report back to you guys. So that should be fun.
You could play. Actually, I was maybe we could save this for a future episode. But I was thinking you could play Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator thing. It's a free game, but it's based on the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I had given that one a look. I was thinking about that one. That's in the mix, anyways. So it should be fun.
Yeah. Next episode, we are talking about Halo. The entire franchise. Where it is, where it's going, where it's been, our personal history with the game. It's going to be a lot of fun. Personally, I gotta admit, I didn't think this episode would be that fun. I enjoyed the crap out of it.
Absolutely, me too. Yeah. Yeah, this one follows very, very closely. So the last episode was the AR/VR one. I was super excited about that one, more than I probably had any right to be. And this one was very, very close on the heels of that one as well. I had a great time, Jeff.
Right. So thank you everyone for watching, listening rather. I'm not going to edit that out. Let's just move forward. We will see you next week. Thank you very much for watching.
See you later.
They should make swimmers wear baggy clothes.
Like real, like competitive swimmers?
Yes.
Why?
Because we already know they know how to swim. Give them, like, handicaps.
Give them handicaps and then put a shark in there. Or maybe just an alligator.
A Sega shark.
With a Nintendo lion riding on its back.
Whoa! Now that's like a image.
With freaking laser beams attached to their freaking heads.
You've ruined it.
Well, that pretty
so
well...
before... What are you doing?
Busy week?
Oh, yeah. Last week was tremendously busy. Although, for some reason, today, I don't know what happened. Do you want me to go on?
I expected you were going to, yes.
Oh, no, I had a really, really, really good day. Everything that went wrong, I corrected immediately, and it just stayed in perfect alignment. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's working!" And then I came home. No,
it's a
no,
goal.
I don't like that. I hate that ideal. I want to experience everything.
Oh, you do not need to have your wiener pierced to know that it would hurt.
But it could happen, and I need to know.
Well, all right, go schedule yourself for a piercing then.
That'll be at the end of my life. When I don't care anymore.
Today's Truth Corner has been brought to you by the letter G and the number 11.
But around the time of puberty, I became like a completely well-mannered human being.
I beg to differ. A fractured collarbone begs to differ.
Well-mannered to my parents. I abused everyone else.
See. Oh. Yes, I remember that. My shoulder suffered the brunt of your abuses.
I always offered for you to counterattack, and you never did.
You were 18 inches taller than me.
Not at first.
No, actually, in grade 10, I think we were pretty much of a height, hey?
No, you were taller than me when I first moved to...
I don't think I've grown since grade 10.
No. I think you stopped around grade 7. Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, it's Jefferson. I'm going to restart. I almost said Polydeuces. Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, it's Jeff, and welcome to Trailing Losers of Defeat. Ready? And joining me today... I'm going to start again.
Okay.
That question mark just threw me off.